The music classroom was filled with the sound of students chatting and tuning instruments. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows, glimmering across the black grand piano that sat in the center of the room like a quiet king among chaos. Most students avoided it unless asked to perform. It demanded confidence, and not everyone had that. At the back of the room sat a quiet young woman. She was small in stature, her hair tied neatly, her expression calm but distant. She didn't talk much, and when she did, her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though every word had to be carefully measured before it left her lips. Her name was Lena. She had joined the academy just 6 months ago, and even now few knew much about her. The teachers often described her as polite, punctual, and disciplined. But some students thought she was strange. She never joined their laughter or shared lunch with them. Instead, she preferred sitting alone near the old piano at the end of the hallway, practicing quietly while others left for the day. Sometimes the janitor would pass by and pause, listening for a moment. Her playing wasn't loud, but it had a gentleness that made even the empty corridor feel alive. Lena wasn't from a wealthy family. While other students had their own instruments at home, she practiced on an old keyboard her parents bought from a thrift store. The keys were uneven, and a few didn't work at all, but she made do. She didn't complain, didn't ask for more. Music wasn't a hobby for her. It was the only place she felt truly free. But despite her love for music, Lena rarely raised her hand in class. When the teacher asked for volunteers to perform, she kept her eyes down, pretending to search for notes in her book. Her classmates often snickered, saying she was too shy or didn't have the talent. The truth was different. Lena wasn't afraid of playing. She was afraid of being seen. Her piano teacher, Mr. Roberts, had been teaching for nearly 20 years. He had seen all kinds of students, those who played to impress, those who played to win competitions, and those who played because they were told to. But Lena puzzled him. She was clearly skilled, yet she never showed it. She played softly during lessons, following instructions but never standing out. One afternoon after class, he called her name as the other students packed their things. "Lena," he said, leaning slightly on the edge of the piano. "You play well, but you never take initiative. Why is that?" She hesitated, clutching her music sheets. I don't like attention, sir." He sighed. "Music needs confidence. It's not enough to play correctly. You must let people hear you." She nodded but said nothing more. When she left the room, he shook his head, unsure what to make of her. Over the next few weeks, nothing changed. Lena continued attending every lesson, completing every assignment. But something about her remained closed off. It wasn't arrogance or laziness. It was more like she had locked away a part of herself that no one could reach. Then one morning, everything changed. It started as an ordinary day. The students walked into class chatting about an upcoming concert. They were excited because it was a chance for a few selected students to perform publicly. Mr. Roberts wanted to see who could handle a difficult piano piece, something that would impress the judges. He stood at the front of the room and wrote the name of the piece on the board, Etude in D minor, Opera 28. The students groaned. It was known for its tricky rhythm and emotional depth, the kind of piece that tested both skill and heart. "All right, Mr. Roberts said. Who wants to try this piece for the next performance?" A few students exchanged glances, then looked away. No one wanted to embarrass themselves in front of the teacher or each other. The silence stretched awkwardly. "Anyone?" he asked again, raising an eyebrow. Still no one moved. Then his gaze landed on Lena. She was sitting quietly in the corner, her pencil in hand, eyes fixed on the music sheet in front of her. "Lena," he said suddenly, "why don't you play it?" The room went still. Everyone turned to look at her. She looked up, startled. "Me, sir?" "Yes. You," he said firmly. "You've been too quiet for too long. Let's see what you can do." Her fingers froze around the pencil. She could feel her classmates' eyes on her. Some curious, others smirking. I haven't practiced that piece before," she said softly. "Then you'll have to," he replied. "You have 3 days. Play it for the class on Thursday." Her heart sank. 3 days. That piece was complex even for experienced students. But saying no wasn't an option. "Yes, sir," she whispered. As soon as the bell rang, whispers filled the air. A few students laughed quietly as they walked out. "She's going to mess up so badly," one of them said under his breath. "I bet she can't even finish the first page," another added. Lena heard every word, but she didn't react. She packed her things slowly and left the room. That evening, she sat in front of her small keyboard at home. The air in her room was still, except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. She placed the new sheet music in front of her and stared at it for a long time. The notes looked intimidating, like a mountain she didn't know how to climb. Her mother peeked into the room. "You're still awake?" "I have to learn this piece," Lena said quietly. Her mother smiled faintly. "Don't overwork yourself, dear. You've always had a gift. Just trust your fingers." When her mother left, Lena took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The sound came out uneven, sharp. She tried again, slower this time. Her hands moved carefully, almost afraid to make mistakes. Hours passed. The room grew darker. The glow from the small desk lamp cast long shadows across the music sheets. Her eyes were tired, but she didn't stop. Every time she hit a wrong note, she would close her eyes and imagine her grandmother's face. Her grandmother had been the one who taught her to play. She remembered sitting beside her as a child, watching her hands glide over the piano like water flowing over stones. "You don't just play notes," her grandmother used to say. "You tell stories through them. Let your heart speak, not your fear." Lena smiled faintly at the memory. It had been years since she lost her grandmother, and since then, she'd stopped performing in front of others. The thought of being judged made her chest tighten, but now she had no choice. The next day, she arrived at school early and went straight to the empty music room. She opened the piano lid and touched the keys softly, as if greeting an old friend. She began to play the difficult passage again and again, trying to find the emotion behind every note. At first her fingers stumbled. Then slowly something began to change. Her breathing synchronized with the rhythm. Her hands started moving with more confidence. She wasn't thinking about the notes anymore. She was feeling them. Unnoticed by her, Mr. Roberts had walked in quietly, watching from the doorway. The sound coming from the piano surprised him. It wasn't perfect yet, but there was something raw and beautiful about it, something real. He didn't interrupt. When she finally noticed him, she stopped, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, standing up. He raised a hand. "No need to apologize. Keep practicing. I just wanted to hear your progress." She nodded shyly, and he left with a small smile. For the next 2 days, Lena did nothing but play. At lunch, while others talked and laughed, she stayed in the practice room. When she made mistakes, she didn't get angry. She just tried again. There was something inside her that wouldn't let her give up. By Wednesday night, she was exhausted but calm. Her fingers ached, but her heart felt light. She sat on her bed, staring at her hands. They were small and delicate, but they had carried years of emotion, practice, and quiet resilience. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself, "I'll play for her." When Thursday arrived, she walked into the classroom with her music sheets pressed to her chest. Her classmates barely noticed her at first, laughing and chatting as usual. But when the teacher announced her name, everyone turned to face the piano. Lena took a deep breath and walked forward. The room grew quiet. The sound of her footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. She placed the sheets on the stand, adjusted the stool, and rested her fingers on the keys. Her heart was racing, but she closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured her grandmother sitting beside her, smiling. Then she began to play. The first few notes floated softly through the room, delicate but clear. The sound filled every corner, washing over the whispers, silencing the laughter. By the time she reached the first crescendo, no one was moving. Even the teacher leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. She played not to impress but to speak, to let out everything she had kept hidden inside for so long. And as the last note lingered in the air, the room was silent. No one dared to speak. For the first time, Lena looked up and realized that every eye in the room was on her. Not with mockery, but with quiet awe. The silence in the classroom was heavy after Lena's performance. Her fingers hovered over the last note, trembling. Slightly, not from fear, but from the release of all the tension she had carried for the past 3 days. She lowered her hands slowly and looked around. Eyes that had once been filled with doubt and expectation now held something entirely different: shock, wonder, and disbelief. Mr. Roberts leaned back in his chair, his mouth slightly open. He had heard many students over the years, some brilliant, some mediocre, some that struggled just to keep up. But what Lena had just played was beyond what he had expected. It wasn't just technically correct, it was alive. Every note told a story, every pause had meaning. Every crescendo reached inside the listener and held them there. One of her classmates, who had been snickering just minutes ago, covered their mouth, unable to hide the surprise. Another student whispered under their breath, How did she do that?" Lena, however, did not smile or celebrate. She quickly gathered her music sheets and returned to her seat at the back of the classroom. Her heart still raced and sweat dotted her forehead, but she felt lighter than she had in months. It was as if she had poured every piece of herself into the piano and left it there, leaving her free for the first time in a long while. "Lena," Mr. Roberts finally said, his voice steady but full of awe, and that was remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. She looked at him, blinking, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, almost whispering. He nodded slowly, then turned to the rest of the class. "Do you all understand what you just witnessed?" The room remained silent, save for a few nods and wide eyes. This is what music should feel like. Technique is important, yes, but heart, emotion, and connection, these are what make a performance unforgettable, and Lena has shown that today. Even those who had doubted her felt a sudden shift. She had gone from being the quiet, invisible student to the center of attention without trying to be. Her classmates' whispers now carried admiration instead of ridicule. After class, students lingered, some pretending to be casual, some unable to resist asking questions. "Lena," one of them said, approaching her carefully, "how did you learn to play like that?" She shook her head slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. "I just did practice," she replied. Her voice was soft, but there was a quiet confidence in it now that hadn't been there before. Another student, more blunt this time, asked, "But seriously, you never play in front of anyone. Where did this come from?" Lena looked down at her hands. Memories of her grandmother, who had taught her piano when she was a child, filled her mind. "I guess I just hadn't needed to play for anyone until now," she said finally. Her classmates left slowly, some still in awe, others whispering to each other about how they had misjudged her. She stayed behind in the empty classroom for a moment, letting the silence wrap around her. The piano now seemed familiar, like an old friend that had been waiting patiently for her return. That evening, Lena sat at her small keyboard at home, replaying the piece quietly. Her fingers moved with more ease than before. She realized that the pressure from her teacher, though frightening at first, had awakened something inside her. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was a story of her struggles, her memories, and the love she had for her grandmother. Her mother peeked in again. "You seem different today," she said gently. "What happened in class?" Lena smiled faintly. "I played, and it felt right," she said. Her mother nodded, understanding more than words could express. "I think she would be proud," she whispered, referring to Lena's grandmother. The next day at school, word of her performance had already spread. Students she had barely spoken to before now approached her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Some asked for tips, others simply wanted to watch her practice. Lena responded politely, but she still kept her distance, not out of pride, but out of habit. She had spent so long in quiet solitude that sudden attention felt strange. Mr. Roberts, however, seemed different. He now looked at her not just as a student, but as someone with incredible potential. During lessons, he encouraged her to explore more challenging pieces, to take risks she had once avoided. At first, Lena was hesitant. She feared failing in front of the class, feared not living up to the expectation that had suddenly been placed on her. But she found that once she started playing, the fear melted away, replaced by focus and passion. One afternoon, he approached her with a new sheet of music. "I want you to try this," he said, placing it gently on the piano stand. "It's more difficult than the last piece, but I think you can handle it." Lena looked at the notes. Her heart skipped a beat. The piece was complex, filled with fast passages and intricate rhythms. For a moment, she felt a flicker of the old fear she had always carried, but then she remembered the feeling of triumph after her last performance. She nodded. "I'll try," she said quietly. She spent the next few days practicing in every spare moment. At lunch, during breaks, and after school, she returned to the piano. She encountered mistakes, finger slips, and moments of frustration, but she refused to give up. Each attempt brought her closer to understanding the piece, feeling it as her own. During one evening practice, she almost gave up. Her fingers were sore and her mind ached with concentration, but she paused and closed her eyes. She imagined her grandmother's voice beside her, gentle but firm. "Music is not just about the notes," she remembered her saying. "It is about telling a story that only you can tell." With renewed determination, Lena picked up her hands and tried again. Slowly, the piece began to take shape. Each note flowed into the next, and she felt a connection to the music she had never felt before. It was as if the piano was speaking through her, expressing emotions she hadn't been able to put into words. By the time Thursday arrived, Lena was ready for the next challenge. She entered the classroom, music sheets in hand, feeling the familiar tension in her chest but also a sense of calm. She knew that no matter what happened, she had done everything she could. Her classmates watched, their curiosity mixed with lingering skepticism. Some were still unsure if she could maintain the brilliance she had shown the previous week. But as she sat at the piano and began to play, all doubts melted away. The piece started slower than before, each note deliberate and filled with emotion. Gradually, the complexity of the music revealed itself. Lena's fingers moved with precision and grace, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The room fell silent, every ear straining to catch the sound. Even the students who had doubted her before felt their hearts lift with each chord. They could see the passion in her expression, the way her eyes closed at moments, completely lost in the music. It was as though she had opened a window to her soul, and everyone was witnessing it for the first time. By the end of the piece, the classroom was still. No one moved, no one spoke. The final note lingered, filling the space with a quiet resonance. Lena opened her eyes slowly, looking around at the faces that had once doubted her. They were now filled with admiration, respect, and even a little awe. Mr. Roberts leaned forward, his expression almost unreadable, but clearly moved. "Lena," he said softly, "that was extraordinary." She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and pride washing over her. For the first time, she felt that she had truly shared her gift with others, not to impress them, but simply to express herself. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Students continued to whisper about her performance, some approaching her to congratulate her, others just staring in quiet amazement. Lena felt a new sense of confidence blossoming inside her, though she remained humble, careful not to let attention overwhelm her. That evening, she returned home and sat at her keyboard once more. She played the piece again, slower this time, savoring each note, each pause, each emotional turn. The music filled the room, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She realized that the real reward was not the applause or admiration. It was the joy of playing, of connecting with the music, of feeling alive through it. Her mother watched from the doorway, smiling gently. "You've changed," she said. Lena nodded. "I think. I'm starting to find myself again," she replied. And for the first time in a long time, Lena believed it. After the excitement of her latest performance, Lena returned home that evening feeling both tired and restless. Her hands ached from hours at the piano, but her mind was far from calm. She sat by the small window in her room, the moonlight spilling across the desk where her music sheets lay. The quiet of the night seemed to invite memories she had long avoided. For a long time, Lena had kept her past carefully hidden from others. Even her closest friends at the academy knew very little about her early life. She had grown up in a small apartment, with walls that echoed more than they protected. Her parents worked long hours, leaving her mostly in the care of her grandmother, a woman whose hands had once graced concert halls across the country. Her grandmother was Lena's first teacher, and in many ways her first audience too. Her memories of those lessons were vivid. The tiny living room had smelled of old books and polish. the keys of the upright piano shiny from years of careful use. Her grandmother would sit beside her, her hand guiding Lena's fingers along the keys, always patient, always encouraging. "You must play with your heart, Lena," her grandmother would say. "Technique is only part of the music. You must feel it, live it." Lena closed her eyes now and could hear the soft voice in her mind, the gentle scolding when she rushed through a passage, the praise when she slowed down and let the music breathe. Those lessons were the foundation of everything she knew about piano. Every note she played, every emotion she conveyed had roots in those hours with her grandmother. When her grandmother passed away, Lena had felt a part of herself vanish. She stopped performing in front of others, not because she lost skill, her fingers still remembered every scale, every chord, but because the joy had gone. She played only in secret, in empty rooms, for no one but herself. The music had become a private world, safe from judgment, free from expectation. The recent challenge from Mr. Roberts had stirred something she thought she had buried. Sitting at her keyboard, she realized that the pressure and the attention had unlocked memories and emotions she hadn't dared confront. Playing for the class had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in years, she had felt alive in the music again. Lena leaned back in her chair, thinking about the next piece her teacher had given her. It was more complex, more demanding, and she knew she would need to dig deep to master it. But she also understood that this was more than just learning notes. It was about rediscovering herself, about reconnecting with the passion that had always been at the core of her being. She pulled out an old box from under her bed, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were yellowed sheet music and photographs of her grandmother, taken in concert halls where the young pianist had once played. Lena carefully removed a photograph and stared at it. Her grandmother's eyes sparkled with joy, pride, and something else, an unspoken challenge to carry on the legacy. The sight brought tears to her eyes. She realized that her reluctance to perform had never been about lack of skill. It had been about fear of losing the connection she had with her grandmother, fear that the music might not live up to the memory of those moments they had shared. And now, standing at the threshold of her next challenge, Lena felt a surge of determination. She would honor that memory no matter what it took. The next morning, she arrived at the academy early. The school was quiet, most students still arriving or chatting in the hallways. Lena went straight to the practice room, carrying the sheet music of the difficult piece and the small box of old memories she had brought along. Sitting at the piano, she placed the photograph of her grandmother nearby, almost as if seeking guidance. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She remembered her grandmother's words. "Feel the music, don't just play it." Taking a deep breath, Lena began. The first notes were slow, tentative, but each one carried the weight of memory and emotion. She played through sections she remembered well, then paused at parts that challenged her. Instead of frustration, she felt patience. This was not a test. It was a conversation with herself and with the woman who had taught her everything she knew. Hours passed. Lena practiced in focused stretches, stopping only to rest her hands or take a sip of water. The sound of her playing filled the empty corridors, soft at first, then growing more confident, more expressive. She imagined the classroom where she had first played the etude in D minor, the wide eyes of her classmates, the subtle nod of approval from Mr. Roberts. That image gave her courage. She replayed the piece repeatedly, each time noticing new details she had missed before. Subtle shifts in tempo, delicate phrasing, slight changes in tone. She began to understand the music not just intellectually but emotionally. It was as if her fingers were remembering the lessons from long ago, and her heart was guiding them through the journey. Later, her mother called from the kitchen. "Lena, dinner is ready," she said softly. Lena nodded, acknowledging her, but didn't stop playing immediately. She felt a strange new energy within her, a mix of fear, excitement, and a deep connection to the music. After dinner, Lena returned to her practice, determined to carry forward every insight she had gained. By the end of the night, her fingers were sore, but her heart felt light and full. She knew that mastering this piece wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she was willing to face the challenge head-on, not just to impress her teacher, but to honor her own growth in the memory of her grandmother. The following day at the academy, Lena's classmates noticed a change. She seemed quieter, but there was a subtle strength in the way she carried herself. When Mr. Roberts gave instructions, she listened carefully, asked precise questions, and then returned to the piano with a calm focus that made even seasoned students pause. During practice sessions, some students approached her, curious to see her progress. "Lena, are you really going to play that piece for the next class?" One asked cautiously. She looked up, her expression serene. "Yes," she said simply. Her classmates nodded, impressed not by her words but by the quiet certainty she carried. The whispers that had followed her last performance were now replaced by curiosity and anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what she would do next, but Lena didn't care about their expectations. She only cared about the music and the story she wanted to tell. Over the next few days, Lena practiced tirelessly. She found herself thinking about the emotions behind each note, the sadness, the longing, the joy, the tension. She experimented with different ways of expressing the same passages, exploring how slight changes in timing or touch could alter the feeling entirely. It was exhausting work, but exhilarating. Every small victory felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost for years. One evening, as she played through a particularly challenging section, tears ran down her cheeks. Not from frustration, but from a deep connection to the music, to her memories, and to the love she had for the woman who had given her this gift. She realized that the music was not just about performance or approval, it was about living through it, feeling it and letting it move her. The night before the class performance, Lena stayed up late, practicing one last time. Her hands were tired, her mind focused, her heart steady. She had done everything she could to prepare, and now she trusted herself. She carefully put the photograph of her grandmother beside the piano, whispered a quiet promise to honor the memory, and finally allowed herself a moment of rest. The next morning, Lena arrived at the academy, carrying her sheet music and her calm determination. Her classmates eyed her curiously, still talking quietly about what they expected. Some thought she might fail, some thought she might shine, but no one truly knew what would happen. She entered the practice room first, adjusting the stool and the music sheets. She sat down, taking a deep breath, and felt the familiar comfort of the piano beneath her fingers. This time she did not play for the class, not yet. She played for herself first, feeling every note, every pause, every emotion. When the other students arrived, they found the room filled with the soft, intricate sound of music that seemed far beyond Lena's years. They paused at the door, listening in silence. Even the most skeptical among them could not deny the depth and skill in every passage. Mr. Roberts stood quietly, watching her play, a faint smile on his face. He had seen brilliance before, but this was different. It was not just technique. It was soul. It was a story unfolding through every measure, every note, every subtle touch of the keys. By the time she finished, there was silence. Not the awkward silence that follows mistakes or missteps, but a reverent silence, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to let the music settle in their hearts. Lena looked up, her eyes meeting Mr. Roberts. He nodded, not a word spoken, but a clear acknowledgement of the journey she had undertaken, not just with this piece, but with herself. She realized that the music had carried her through fear, doubt, and grief, and now she was stronger, more certain of her own voice. For Lena, this was only the beginning. She knew the next challenge would be harder, the expectations greater, but she also knew that she had discovered something inside herself that could never be taken away. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between past and present, between memory and expression, between fear and courage, and with that understanding, Lena left the practice room ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the music within her would always guide her. The day of the performance arrived, and the air at the academy was thick with anticipation. Students gathered in the classroom earlier than usual, chatting nervously, flipping through their music sheets and occasionally casting glances at the grand piano that stood silently at the front. Lena walked in quietly, her sheet music tucked under her arm, her steps measured and calm. She had rehearsed tirelessly, but the weight of expectation was heavier than ever. Her classmates eyed her curiously, many were still skeptical, while others were simply amazed at the skill she had shown during her practice sessions. Whispers passed from one student to another. "Do you think she can really do it?" One asked. "She's already incredible, but this piece is even harder," said another. Lena, however, paid them no attention. Her focus was inward on the music and the emotions that had brought her this far. Mr. Roberts stood near the piano, adjusting the music stand and glancing briefly at the waiting students. He gave a small nod to Lena, a gesture of quiet encouragement. She returned the nod, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. This was not just another performance. This was a culmination of everything she had been holding inside. The years of quiet practice, the lessons with her grandmother, the moments of doubt, and the slow, steady building of courage. When it was her turn, the room fell silent. All eyes were on her as she approached the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys before she began. Her heartbeat was steady but strong, each pulse seeming to echo in the room. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the silence wrap around her, letting herself remember why she played, for the music, for the story, for the memory of her grandmother. Then her fingers moved. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but each one resonated with clarity and emotion. The room seemed to lean in, the chatter of students fading into complete silence. Even those who had doubted her skill felt themselves drawn in, unable to look away. Every chord carried meaning, every pause invited reflection. As the piece grew more complex, Lena's confidence grew with it. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision, yet there was a fluidity that made the performance feel alive rather than mechanical. She leaned into the music, swaying slightly, letting her body express what her hands could not fully convey. The emotions poured from her, tension, longing, joy, and sorrow, all blending seamlessly. Her classmates exchanged glances, some with wide eyes, some mouths slightly open. None of them had expected this. The quiet girl they had overlooked had transformed into a storyteller, speaking through the piano in a language everyone could understand. The notes seemed to reach past the barriers of the room, filling the space with something almost tangible, a presence, a life, a story unfolding with each measure. Even Mr. Roberts, who had taught hundreds of students in his career, found himself holding his breath. He knew skill when he saw it, but this was something more. This was mastery born not just from talent, but from dedication, emotion, and deep understanding. He could see the years of practice hidden behind Lena's calm exterior, the hours spent alone at a worn keyboard, and the love that had nurtured her gift. Lena reached the middle section of the piece, where the tempo shifted rapidly, and the notes became more intricate. Her fingers moved with speed and grace, never missing a beat, never faltering. The room seemed to blur around her. She was no longer thinking about her classmates or the audience. She was thinking only about the music, about the story she was telling, about the feeling she wanted to share. A few students unconsciously leaned forward in their chairs, unable to resist the pull of the performance. Some had tears in their eyes, moved not just by the technical brilliance but by the emotion embedded in each note. Others felt a lump in their throat, a mix of awe and regret for having underestimated her. The climax of the piece approached. It was the part that required not only skill but courage. Notes that climbed higher and higher, rapid arpeggios that demanded precision, a final crescendo that could either soar or collapse. Lena's hands did not tremble. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythm, on the music itself. She imagined her grandmother sitting beside her, nodding encouragingly, her presence giving Lena strength. As she reached the crescendo, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Each note rang out clearly, perfectly timed, yet full of expression. The power in her playing was undeniable. Her classmates felt it, the teachers felt it, even the air seemed charged with energy. It was a performance that went beyond skill. It was a story told with every chord, every pause, every subtle shift in tone. Then came the final notes. Lena slowed, letting each one linger, savoring the resonance, feeling the vibrations travel through the floor and into the hearts of her listeners. The last note hung in the air, suspended for a moment as if waiting for the world to catch up. Silence followed. Not the awkward silence of a performance gone wrong, but the kind that fills a room when everyone is too stunned to speak. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate, counting seconds that felt longer than usual. Lena opened her eyes slowly, glancing at her classmates. Their faces were filled with admiration, disbelief, and awe. Mr. Roberts finally spoke, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "Lena, that was extraordinary." He paused, searching for the right words. "I have never witnessed a performance like that in all my years of teaching. Not just for the skill, but for the heart and soul you put into it. That was remarkable. A few students stood up, clapping softly at first, then louder as they realized the magnitude of what they had just experienced. Some of the more outspoken ones wiped their eyes discreetly, unable to believe the transformation they had just witnessed. They had come expecting perhaps a good performance, maybe even a mistake, but not this. A flawless, moving expression of talent and emotion. Lena rose from the piano, feeling a mix of relief and quiet pride. Her hands tingled from the intensity of playing, but her heart was light. She had shared herself through the music in a way she had never done before, and the reaction, though overwhelming, mattered less than the connection she had felt with the piano and with her own emotions. Her classmates surrounded her, asking questions, offering congratulations, expressing their astonishment. "How did you do that?" one whispered. "I've never heard anything like it," said another. Lena smiled gently. "I just played," she said softly. She did not need to explain further. Her music had spoken for her. Even students who had once teased her or doubted her ability now looked at her with respect. The quiet girl in the back of the room had shown everyone that talent, dedication, and emotion could not be hidden forever. They realized that judging someone by appearances or silence alone was foolish. Lena's quiet demeanor had masked not weakness but depth, resilience, and skill. After the applause had died down, Mr. Roberts approached her once more. "Lena, you've changed the way I think about teaching," he said. "Not because you played well, but because you reminded me that music is about heart, as much as it is about technique. You've inspired not only your classmates, but me as well." Lena nodded, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to play the music the way it should be played." He smiled warmly. "And you did beautifully." The rest of the day passed in a kind of dreamlike state. Students who had ignored her before now approached her with curiosity, hoping to learn from her example. Others simply watched from a distance, unsure if they could ever reach the level of expression they had just witnessed. But Lena, despite the attention, remained humble. She answered questions politely, shared tips carefully, but never sought to show off. Her joy came from playing, not from recognition. That evening, Lena returned home, her fingers still tingling from the intensity of the day. She sat at her keyboard once more, playing the piece slowly, savoring every note, every subtle variation, every emotion. The music no longer felt like a challenge or a test. It felt like a conversation, a connection between her past and present, between her memories and her growth, between herself and everyone who had listened. Her mother watched from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. "You've done something extraordinary," she said gently. Lena nodded, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known for years. "I just played," she whispered, "but it felt right." And for the first time she understood that the music was no longer just a gift or a memory. It was a part of her, something she could carry with her through every challenge, every fear, every moment of doubt. It was her voice, her story, her heart, expressed through the piano in a way that words could never capture. As the night settled, Lena looked at the photograph of her grandmother beside the keyboard. She smiled softly, a silent promise in her eyes. She would continue to play, to grow, to share the music, honoring the lessons of the past while forging her own path into the future. The classroom performance had changed everything, not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and let her music speak. And in doing so, she had discovered that courage, dedication, and heart could turn even the quietest, most overlooked person into someone unforgettable.